about the material today. One thing I'd like to say is I think that some of the things here are going to be review for people who've been here longer. So feel free to, just sort of say like, hey, I already know this, or, we can take this conversation however you want. I want to see how I can add to your day. But today's, what we're going to talk about is create and plan. So what's create and plan? And what's our goal for today? So our goal is always the same, have better sales conversations. How are we going to do that? So create and plan is our SCM and our agile ticketing solutions. And the whole idea is understand these better, understand customer questions better, understand why they're asking certain things, and how we can use these questions to show GitLab value, right? So I do think that some of this will be recap from last quarter. Just let me know if this is stuff that you've heard before. But yeah, so how are we going to do this? We're going to understand what this is from a technology perspective, but the most important thing is asking the question of like, why are customers actually asking some of these things, right? So if they're asking for clustering or if they're asking for HA, then why do they care? And what can I say so that I can, show the value of GitLab? That's the goal of today. There's a little mini project at the end. This is the third session and no one's actually got into it. So we'll see if there's time at the end, but let's jump right in. So GitLab's broad, right? I think that that's one of the challenges with understanding our product. There's literally 10 different product categories. And what we're specifically talking about today is these two product categories. And just to translate them, create is all of our SCM technology and features, and plan is all of our agile stuff. So epics, issues, time tracking and things like that. And once again, the goal today is to figure out why is this important for people. When someone asks you a question, what are they actually looking for, and how can we articulate how we can help? So one of the things I always like to just like start off with is like, well, I actually first have a question for y'all. So like, y'all get a ton of customer questions. I think everyone in this call is from EMEA except for me. I know that y'all have a lot of inbound. So what percentage of your customer questions in your region are actually about our SCM and issue ticketing? Is it like half? Is it about a third? Like, in terms of your conversations right now, how much is it surrounding these two feature sets?
I think it's quite high, to be honest. I mean, because especially in SMB, because we are mostly talking about the startup rounds and the silver plan and ticket management and issues and everything regarding this is always something they're trying to figure out how to make it better, and sometimes they involving project manager if the teams are bigger, but it's always a conversation. It's always very interesting to see how they're doing it right now with different tools or multiple tools, and how they want to implement it with GitLab. So it's very high, I think, in SMB.
Gotcha. In terms of these conversations, a lot of times like a customer will say like, hey, do you have this functionality? And the conversation will depend on it because they need it. Out of SCM and our ticketing solutions, how often does that happen? Where it's just sort of like the next conversation depends on whether or not we can do something out of our SCM or ticketing solutions.
I think it's very high.
Okay.
Definitely.
Gotcha.
I mean,
yeah, gotcha. All right. Thanks for that. I think that that's really interesting. There's a difference in perspective between Europe and America. So that's good for me to know. Let me talk to you about just sort of like the industry behind these, right? So obviously this is the reason why I started out with these two feature sets. Is this fundamental part of our value proposition. What makes GitLab is the fact that we have SCM and issue tracking all built into the same tool, right? And that's really important for people. Just like from taking a more general industry perspective, one thing to know is that we do operate in crowded markets for both of these. And so if you just take a look at this image on the bottom right, there's a lot of different like people who do very similar things. I'll just give you an example. So over here, I just typed into Google best project management software, and you get a list of 40 best project management tools. And the big problem with this is that you know, you don't want to be competing against 40 different other people, especially some of these people, they're really hungry. Some of these companies, they're really hungry. They put all of their development into their project management tool, and that's where they get all their revenue from, right? So um, what we don't want to do is to go up against all of these different tools. What we do want to do is to deliver the message that we're different from all of these tools because we're one tool for the entire DevOps lifecycle, and we have everything integrated together because that's how we stand out from all of those different companies. So yeah, there's tons of different project management tools. There's a lot of SCM tools. The markets are mature. A lot of different mature solutions exist. So Jira came way before GitLab, and it's part of the reason why they have so much incumbency. And our real unique differentiator from all of these people is the fact that we are one integrated solution. So do we have differentiators? Totally. I use a ton of my messaging on the fact that it's one integrated solution. If people ask about the individual differentiators, I do speak about them, but it's not how I lead a sale. All right, so I think that everyone's seen this slide before. If anyone hasn't, can you let me know? Because otherwise I'm going to skip it. All right, great. So I got a lot of like, I only had like 50% of reaction, so I'll just go over it real quickly. Fundamentally, all of software is it's a bunch of different text files, and it's really kind of interesting to think that someone could be getting paid like 80 to 100 euros, 1,000 euros a year just fundamentally editing text files, right? And so what do I mean by that? Well, this is GitLab itself, and GitLab fundamentally is around several thousand text files. That's all GitLab is. And so over here is the text files that actually make up GitLab. If I go into this is one of these like several thousand text files. And fundamentally, all these text files are doing is telling machines to do stuff. So it could be turn a light on, could be turn a button on, could be create a folder. But any sort of software application at a fundamental level, literally all it is a combined set of text files. So this is GitLab text files. As you can see, literally what developers do all day is they edit these text files, and that's how they get paid. Their value to a company is creating and editing text files. And when I was a developer, this is what I did all day. And so, yeah, this one developer is literally getting paid to add in this text, take some different text out. So the big problem with that is that for something like GitLab, there's a bunch of different problems, right? So one, if you just think about like a lot of times we have these AMAs, right? And then so it might be 100 people in marketing editing the same text file, and what happens? It gets really disorganized, right? And so it becomes way more complicated because GitLab, instead of just one text file, it's actually about several thousand text files. And then problem number two is, as opposed to having 100 people editing it, we have around 3,000 people editing the same set every release in every single time zone. So if you just imagine something like Google Documents, there's no way that we could use Google Docs for all of these files, right? So SCM's a tool for storing these text files. When I was a developer for half a decade, and I'd say that I probably spent 5 to 10% of all of my days using things like Git and my SCM tools. I actually use GitHub. And I think it's important to understand just sort of like where this fits into the hierarchy of developer tools. So for instance, like sometimes when you're an engineer or like a welder or plumber, you have tools that are nice to have. And then sometimes there's tools that are completely necessary for your job. So you can't be like a painter if you don't have brushes, right? So if you're a developer, SCM is completely 100% necessary. There's no way to do modern software development without SCM, and it's extremely important for everyone's developer flow. You literally spend like maybe 30 minutes on SCM every single day. Yeah, so SCM is a tool for storing these text files. Over here in the bottom right, you can see a chart on the market share for the different tools. And as you can see, the market's consolidating on Git. I used to use Git all the time. And one thing I'd say about it is that it's by far the easiest solution. And I believe that what we're going to see in the next couple of years is, even though it has 90% of the market share right now, I think it's going to have 95% of the market share because it's a better piece of technology. All right, so Git's the most popular piece of SCM tool. We already know that GitLab's built on Git. One thing to keep in mind though is like Git is open source, which means that other people can just take it and use it and then build better versions of it and then sell that open source tool. So that's what GitLab and GitHub does. So let's talk about some of the things that this does. This should be a review for a lot of people here. So feel free to try and just let me skip ahead if you want. But one problem, I think that we've all done this before, is like you had some sort of essay for college. You had version 1, version 2, and then you have like you finally edited it. So now you have version with edits. Now you have a version with that you finally proofread. You got your teacher to look at it. Then you finally added in citations, right? So that's version 16. And then you got your final draft, but then you need to change something, and then there's the actual final draft, right? And so the big problem with this is, one, I have 20 files, which I don't want to have, right? And number two, this is really unwieldy, right? And as you can imagine, for a gigantic software project like GitLab, you don't have one essay that you're trying to version control. You have maybe 5,000 different files that you need to keep a track of. So there's a lot of complexity here. There's no way the solution scales. Problem number two is just sort of like, we have 5 people in this room right now, but imagine we had to all write some big essay for school. So we divided up into 5 chunks, and the whole idea is to copy and paste it together. It should be easy, right? But what ends up always happening is that people make changes that are universal to the entire file, right? So 3 people might change the font, 2 people might change like the styling, 1 person might make it double spaced, and then so it's never as simple as just copying and pasting everything in. Someone has to copy and paste it in and then choose like, there has to be sort of like rules so that this process of like splicing all the code together is actually done in an organized manner. So it's like, we have 5 people right now in this group. If we were just trying to copy and paste some essay together, we'd have to like come to a meeting and figure out what sort of spacing we wanted, what sort of font we wanted, because ultimately a bunch of people would be editing the same thing, right? But now imagine if there's around 3,000 people editing GitLab code. As you can see over here, like here's all the merge requests that come in, right? And so there could be 5 different people trying to edit the same file. There needs to be some sort of tool that like organizes all of that. And so this is what a merge request is. And so what the merge request is, actually is the issue. I'm looking at the wrong thing. So this is a merge request, right? And in the merge request, the developers are basically handing in their code. And one thing I like to say about this is that this is especially important because we're an open source project. People try to hijack open source projects all the time. And if you can imagine, like, let's just say that we are an open source project. It is theoretically possible for our competitors and for other businesses to try to hijack our roadmap by adding in code that either like, tries to steer us into a bad direction, or like, is gonna like, so they have like our competitors literally can submit merge requests into GitLab and influence like how the product works. They could do it from an account that is not tied to like Microsoft or something like that. And so people actually try to do this. So another thing that like SCM does, and especially for an open source project, is you need to create some sort of gate for getting code in. Not everyone can just like edit our files, right? And so what the merge request view does is it creates a mechanism that serves as a gate. So if we just go back to this merge request here, not everyone can just edit our files. You have to get your code approved. And so over here, you can see that there's only a certain number of people that can approve this. These are all GitLab people. So this prevents people from, from either a competitor or someone who just like doesn't understand the roadmap of our product from, doing something that's going to be detrimental to our technology, right? And so this is the gate that SCM has created through the merge request view. Yeah, in real software development, you can have hundreds of people working on the same project spread out across 10 different time zones. Without SCM, you could not do this. So let's talk about the brief workflow. I'm not trying to inundate you with terms, but I do think that it's important to understand some of these terms. There's the idea of like a master branch, and in your master branch is your current and best running version. This is like the source of truth, right? And so if your master branch gets messed up, then your website could theoretically stop working. So you need to protect it. And so people don't directly edit the master branch. What they do is they do this thing called branching. And so the master branch lives like, so all of the code, which is the master branch, lives on some sort of centralized server. And then you actually only edit the, so like step one is you do this thing called branching. What branching is a copy and paste all of these text files from the master branch to now basically I now have them all downloaded to my MacBook, right? So in this, after I've branched, I have an identical set of text files between the master branch and my MacBook. And I actually edit the text files that are my MacBook and not the ones on my master branch. So at this point, they started to diverge, right? So I'm a developer, I'm working on my stuff. I'm making some chart. Every time I hit save, basically hitting save is making a commit. So you can think about committing and saving as the exact same thing. And so I'm making my chart, I make some progress, hit save or commit, make another commit after I fix something, and then I made a final commit when I'm really proud of my work, right? And so my button's done, my chart's done, I want to hand my work in, which is ultimately how I get credit as a developer. So I have to go through now this gating mechanism, right? And that's when I create a merge request. And then so merging this code is getting these three commits into the master branch. All of these pull requests here, it's just people trying to get whatever changes that they made into the master branch. And that is fundamentally what a merge request does. So after this code were merged, all of this green text would be added in, this green text would be added in, this red text would be added, would be taken out, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, then the developer gets a pat on their back and then they get paid or something like that, right? So yeah, let's just demo some of the functionality that we had. So I remember, y'all remember this from when we did, I'm looking at the wrong thing. When we did, the demos from last quarter, but here's GitLab, right? So it's several thousand text files. If I go in the history view, then I can see the history for my entire project. And I can see that within the last hour, there was literally about 15 changes that were made. And just going back to our earlier example where it's like, if we did the whole version 1, version 2, version 3 of all these files, then this would be like, it would get super complicated, right? The second thing that's really, really important is that when you're a developer, a lot of times you are fixing some sort of thing that was implemented 2 years ago. And the person who implemented this thing may no longer be with the company, right? And then so it's just sort of like, imagine I made some sort of website. Now all of a sudden we're running into problems with it. I have to go figure out what part of the code has to do with this problem. And the person who implemented it originally is no longer here, so I can't ask this person, right? So one thing that SCM does is it provides history. And so let's just say that I've identified where the problem comes from. It comes from, this file, for instance. And now what I have to do is I can go in the history view and I can go now look into, all right, here are the two versions of it. It changed this and this and this. So there's only been, let's just say that there were 5 changes here. This isn't the best example, but I know it worked in this change. I know it worked in this change. This change happened and then stuff stopped working like, shortly after that. So now I've identified the problem probably comes from this change. Let me look at it. And so, all right, this is the change that this engineer implemented. And so theoretically, I can just undo the changes. Maybe that would fix it. But the more important thing is that SCM gives you the history log about why this change was made. So when this developer was here, we have documentation on why he or she changed his file. And then even though he or she is not with the company anymore, I understand their reasoning. And this is super, super valuable. For debugging software projects, you need this history because otherwise it'd just be impossible to like maintain them at a quick rate. And so this is another thing that SCM does. So yeah, so we looked at version control for a project. We looked at version control for a file. We looked at how software developers debug projects using the history for each change. This is incredibly important. There's basically no way to be a software developer without this functionality, and this is something that Git does. And then the other thing that we talked about is merge request. We are an open source project. There needs to be some sort of gate for people submitting things. Otherwise, your competitors hijack our product. So what merge requests do is they provide an approval mechanism that protects our code from getting hijacked and make sure that we're still on track. And so GitLab's merge request process and our approvals are the best. I used to use GitHub for about like half a decade. That we can, with GitLab, we can say like, all right, to get this code in, you need to have 2 people from the test team, 1 person from security. It touches this specific file, so you need someone director level or above at GitLab. And all the ability to have like these rules like this is not something that our competitors have right now. So it's a really great function that we have in GitLab. All right, can I clarify anything about all this branching stuff? Because I know that this is like a lot of jargon and stuff real quick.
This is basically what we did when we started, I think, and we had to change on the website, upload our profile photo and change our biography and everything so it goes on the website. We all like had to change this in Git and then start a merge request and then wait for it to merge into the master. So I think we all did it a little bit, but it's very interesting to see where you see the changes and everything. My question would be, because you just mentioned that the benefit of GitLab is that you have these rules that certain parts of the team have to approve a code in comparison to GitHub. Does this have to do with the permission levels that we have, or does this simply have to do with source code management? That is just a rule. You need to have a tester, you need to have a security, you need to have those people, otherwise the merge request is not allowed? Or can you personally say, okay, I want one of this team, one of that team, or one overseeing? Basically, you do your own approval rules.
Yeah.
And it's the difference between GitHub. You don't have these approval rules per segment or per what you're working in.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So thanks for mentioning it. The way to think about it is that we have really complicated, complicated is not the right word, but we give organizations the ability to customize permissions however they want. And how we do it gives customers a lot more control than any other tool that I've ever seen. I used GitHub for about half a decade. The amount of customization that you can do in GitLab is way higher than you can do in GitHub. And so there's different ways of doing this that GitLab supports. One is that there's the different permissions, right? So there are about 7 different types of users in GitLab. So you can have like an auditor, you can have like a developer, and then you can have like
reporter, maintainer, there's lots of.
Yeah, exactly. So over here, guest, reporter, developer, maintainer, owner. These people can do different stuff. Not some of these people can only create issues. Some of them can only see everything. The developers now you can start submitting merge requests. Maintainers are like the maintainer of the environment. They can now do like sysadmin. They can admin the server itself, and owners can do everything. They're like your super users, right? So like your VP is like your owner. So that's one level of permissions that we have, which is baked into each user that we have at GitLab. Other things that we do, so it's like we are taking a look at the approvals that we had. This is actually something that's different and is something that's complementary to what we just looked at. And so what approvers list is, we can customize it even further. And so it's just sort of like, you actually create some sort of file that determines which users are eligible for approving your merge requests. And so you can customize this file however you want. If you wanted to have like, hey, you need 4 security people, 2 test people, 3 developers, and 1 director, because this is really top secret important stuff, then you can customize it that way. If it's a smaller, faster moving project, then you can customize it so that you just need 2 developer approvals, right? So it's extremely customizable. There's one file that you write that actually determines all of these rules. Great. So like one more thing that I want to talk about is like a merge conflict. I know that this is something that we hear from time to time. What a merge conflict is it's when two people write a merge request that edits the same file. And now the big problem is, well, like, you know, if I accept the person's changes, then I can't accept the other person's changes. And then so it's just sort of like there just needs to be some sort of way of like resolving that, right? So it's just sort of like, imagine, I'll just give you a visual example. So here's GitLab code, danger file. Let's go in the danger file. So like, let's just say that I edit this line and turn it into, you know, like some text, whatever, right? And then, you know, Christina edits this exact same line and then changes it to some other text. So I say like, I changed this into the literal like text purple, right? And then Christina edits it and then she writes blue, right? We both create merge requests and both of them are now going to show up in the merge request view. And if I merge my code, then now the master branch is going to reflect the fact that I put this in as like blue. And Christina's merge request no longer makes sense because it doesn't reflect the current version of the code anymore. Her merge request is still going to say like, this text is the older version. I want to change it to green. But this code actually changed since the last time she made her merge request. Bottom line, I don't think that it's super important to understand like all of the syntax about this, but if people are editing the same file, it creates merge requests, and that's a problem. So GitLab is really good at resolving merge requests. It's better than GitHub. I'm gonna skip the exercise for now. Let's talk about differentiators. We have a huge differentiator, and let's talk about it. So advanced self-hosted functionality with high availability. That's a lot of different terms. Let's unpack what this means. But I'm just gonna start with a story, right? GitLab has two deployment methods. One's the SaaS. If you use their SaaS offering, then it's Google Cloud fundamentally, right? Option number two is you can get your own server and install GitLab on it. So that's self-hosted, right? So let's just say that we're some sort of super, super, super top secret like government branch. And what we work with is, you know, like social security numbers for the United States. And we got to go store this data somewhere. And it's, we know that other countries are trying to like hack all this data. And our security team literally has like tons and tons and tons of security rules. Google Cloud is not up to snuff with our security rules. They are not secure enough. So what we do is we have a couple of data centers that are underground. They're literally underground and they are completely disconnected from the internet. And so like to get into this data center, it's surrounded by barbed wire fence. And then you have to get like top secret security clearance, 3 different levels. Then you take some elevator downstairs and then you have a bunch of servers. And then this is like where bank financial information is, or like where social security information is kept, right? So extremely highly secure. So for a business like that, or a government branch, they don't trust, they would never trust our SaaS. And the reason why is because our SaaS fundamentally is running on Google Cloud. So if Google Cloud messes up, then all their data is lost. If GitLab makes some sort of vulnerability, then like all of a sudden their data is lost. So they have to have it self-hosted. So just a recap, some customers require self-hosted as opposed to the SaaS just because their security rules are so high. And a lot of times these customers require this thing called high availability. So what's high availability? So don't get confused by this diagram. The whole idea with high availability is, I'm not even gonna show this diagram. The whole idea with high availability is like, let's just say that like I'm Amazon.com or I'm Netflix or I'm Facebook. I get all of my revenue from having my website up. If my website's down, I literally lose millions of dollars like a minute. There's no way that my website can go down. So I have all of these data centers. I need to go design my environment where if some data center sets on fire, gets hit by an earthquake, literally no one's affected and people can still go to Amazon.com. It might be a little bit slower, but like what we've done is we've made our web service highly available. Well, how do you do this? You do this by making really, really big clusters of servers. So let me show you how this works. This is a simplified diagram, but this is an example of a server cluster, right? And the whole idea is that because I have two machines that are running my web service, if one of them dies or, I have to reboot it or like, sets on fire or whatever, then all of the work just goes to this server number 2 and my website still runs, right? And so this is how I implement high availability. The whole idea is that like I build in a bunch of redundancy into my environment. If one data center gets hit by an earthquake, I have many other data centers. I have now implemented a highly available web service, and so it's going to continue running. So all of these like top secret, like whatever bank financial institutions that require all the security stuff, they require high availability because if some of their servers get compromised, then people still need to like be able to pull money out of their financial account, right? Like if like your bank stopped like giving money because of some problem, then like people would panic, right? It's something that can never happen. All right, so bringing everything back together, some customers are security conscious, they require self-hosted functionality, and they require high availability. So that's the ability to have clustered servers, which is going to create like web services that are going to be like really, really, really reliable. The whole idea is that like if I experience some problem, it doesn't matter. It's not going to affect my business. And what I want to say about this is that GitLab is by far the best in this. In this type of customer scenario, we have 80% of the market. GitHub has 20% of the market. We are way better than everyone else in this because we thought about these things when we designed the product. Yeah, so literally we're better. GitHub's trying to catch up with our roadmap right now on this, but like we are substantially better and we win the vast majority of the deals that fall into this category. So it's a huge differentiator that we have. What other differentiators do we have? Honestly, like a lot of it just has to do with permissions, right? So we talked about how there's different types of users with GitLab. When I was using GitHub, they didn't really have this concept that may have changed. Because they're copying our roadmap, but like the amount of like permission levels and like who can edit what and stuff like that is way better with GitLab than any other product that I've used, and especially GitHub. So this is something that like it makes a difference, is a huge differentiator or not really. All right, can I clarify anything that I just talked about right now? I know that we just like talked about clustering and highly available web services and everything like that.
That's very interesting because I'm sorry, because the high availability, honestly, I never talk with a customer about this. Maybe it's because in SMB it's not that big of a deal. But the user permission levels we talked about a lot, the merge approvals, the different approvals, that this customization is there, we talk a lot, but it's very interesting to hear about the high availability. This is a big issue, so it would be good to dig into this a little bit, see how we could leverage that when we talk to the prospects and ask them, is this something that you really need? Because it could be, like I said, a big differentiator to sell the product.
Yeah, I think that I really appreciate your SMB perspective. Thanks for mentioning that. I think that it matters way more for enterprise and for federal. So I know a bunch of like federal organizations, you cannot have this deal unless this functionality is in place because their security team is going to reject your tool. Like it is not secure enough unless like you deploy it in this way. I think that for SMB, if you have like 10, 20, 30 developers, then like you only need really one GitLab server, right? And then so you don't care about having a cluster. Your environment's not large enough to warrant having like 5 servers that does this. Just because, and a lot of times like, so I worked for a startup about like 6 years ago. We eventually got acquired. And then the whole idea is like, we got an A round of funding. It was $2 million or something. So it's like, they want to use the SaaS in that instance because it gives them way more flexibility, right? So it's like, if they deployed their own server and then their development team got bigger, then they need to buy another server, they need to install GitLab on it, and that just takes a lot of time. You don't want to have hardware. Because in a startup, like a lot of times you don't even know if you're going to exist in 3 years, right? So I'd much rather not sink all my money into capital transactions and spend like $5,000 on servers. I'd rather have it in the cloud and just pay like, cloud server costs like in the United States costs like 12 cents per hour, 14 cents per hour. So it's like, I'd much rather have like pay for my use than have a capital transaction, because literally we were a startup and we didn't even know if like we were going to exist in a year and a half. So thanks for your perspective.
I had a question regarding high availability. To my understanding, if they're using a self-hosted instance and they're managing their own servers, aren't they able to do this themselves, meaning doing multiple clusters on their servers? And if so, what added value GitLab adds in this scheme?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm happy to chime in here for that. So there's no additional cost for deploying GitLab with in a clustered fashion versus, so we're talking about self-hosted now. You're paying for the subscription, and the subscription does not care how many servers you deploy it on. So I think I'm answering. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question again? I just want to make sure I'm actually answering it.
Is high availability, where is the value in our offering of high availability, knowing that they can do it themselves, they can have GitLab on 2 servers eventually, if I'm right?
Yeah, so the value of having high availability for GitLab is that it's just safer for your environment. If this server stops working, then this server like continues to work. And just to put this into perspective, when I was a developer for a startup, every once in a while, your tools that are, imagine if like Salesforce went down, right? How much would that affect your productivity? It's the same idea with GitLab. So it's just sort of like every single tool I've ever used, GitHub, GitLab, Salesforce, they go down from time to time. And if that affects the productivity of your team, then what's the value, what's the loss in terms of value to your business, right? So you're paying all these people like 30 euros like an hour or something like that. And then if their productivity is affected, that affects your business. So the reason why people want to have clusters of GitLab servers is so that they can just have GitLab up and running in a more resilient manner. And the whole idea is that like, if part of my environment's affected, I get hit by earthquake or something, well, like obviously people need to take care of their families and it's still going to be affected. But like, like we're not going to have problem with our tools. GitLab's going to be up and running because we deployed it in a clustered fashion.
So what you're saying is that the functionality at GitLab of high availability is just giving them the ability to have a second server they can run GitLab onto, which they wouldn't have if they had, for example, bronze starter plan, or because high availability is in the premium one, right?
If against our competitors, they're the level of, so GitHub now has clustering, but their clustering is not nearly as good as ours. And if you want true clustering right now, you pretty much need GitLab for SCM.
Okay.
So it's literally almost like a checkbox thing. I am a customer that requires this. Can your product do X, Y, Z? Said GitLab says check, check, check. GitHub says check, check. Well, I require Z too. So it's like, we're going to go with GitLab. So a lot of the deals, especially in the enterprise and federal space, they work like that.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks for that question. All right. So let's talk about project management. So we just talked about all the create functionality. Let's talk about the plan functionality. That's part 2. So let's start with the story, right? So we got 5 people in this meeting. We are now wedding planners. And we got 300 people that's coming to this wedding, right? So we got to divide up all this work. We need to come up with lists of things to do. We have to figure out who's going to be running with each item, right? So who's going to find the venue? Who's going to figure out the flowers? Who's going to, like send out the invitation list? Who's going to go coordinate the bridal parties, right? we got to somehow give progress on each item and communicate them to everyone else, because ultimately we have stakeholders, right? So with, you know, so bride and groom, they hired us to make stuff work for them. They need to know progress on how this stuff's coming along, right? And the last thing that they need to know is which items need to be done in a certain order. If we just came up with a simple like to-do list and we just started like, all right, let's do the first one first. Let's do task number 2 first. Let's do task number 3. Well, the problem is that like, it doesn't work like that, right? So it's like, you can't like decorate the venue until you know what the venue is. And you also can't like send out the invitation list like 1 week before the wedding, right? The invitations need to be sent out first, right? So you need to figure out like what sort of sequencing all this stuff works in. So project management tools take care of all of this. They're very popular. Jira has over 50% of the project management market. So like literally in software development, Jira has over 50% of the market. They're really, really big. And project management tools are pervasive in software development. You basically can't, just like you can't do your job without SCM, you really can't do your job without project management tool too. So this is something I like to say is that like there's, not to get too abstract, but there's better goals that you can have, right? So it's just sort of like, this has to do with organizational leadership theory, but not to get too abstract, but it's like, if you're leading a team, then a bad thing to say to one of your team members is you need to get better. And they're going to look at you and they're going to be like, well, thanks. You know, like, all right, who, like, how do I do that, right? But a much better goal is say like, hey, I've noticed that the amount of, you know, like, that like you're doing everything, that your results are a little bit lower. You're doing everything by email. Would you, but you know, some of our other team members are using a lot of LinkedIn and having a lot of success with it. So my goal for you for this week is to go talk to Mike LeBeau, and goal number 2, and talk to him about like how to use like, you know, better outreach stuff. And goal number 2 is I want you to send out like, you know, activate like 3 of these sequences for the week or something like that, right? So that's a better goal. Why? Because it actually tells me something that I can do as opposed to something nebulous like get better. That's just sort of like, I don't even know what to do with that, right? So what's a good goal? Good goals are specific. So as opposed to like get better, it's like go activate X number of outreach sequences. They're measurable, right? So as opposed to like, I want to get better in shape, you say like, I want to go decrease my resting heart rate by 10 by the next 2 months through working out, right? They have to be attainable. If you tell someone a goal, which is like, hey, I want to like go run a marathon in like 2 weeks, then that's not achievable, right? It's got to be like incremental progress. It's the whole idea of iteration that we have here. And then relevant, obviously that makes sense. Time bound, you have to have time limits to all of your goals. Otherwise, nothing gets done. So we can, part of the reason why GitLab project management stuff is really good, and any sort of good project management tool in general is going to be good if they help you to implement these SMART goals. That's the secret to project management tools. If they do all of them, that's great. If they do some of them, then they're not going to be as good. And ultimately, what do you get out of this in a good project management tool? You get better collaboration across your organization. That may help out your organization 20, 30%, right? In terms of, let's just say that a business is pouring like $20 million into their engineering. Well, if you can get 20 to 30% more out of them, then what's the cash value for that, right? Other things about project management, they provide history. I'm going to show you how that works. They provide accountability. That's also really important for organizations. They give management a sense of progress. I want to talk about a story about that. And they help to optimally sequence work. So when we're talking about project management in GitLab, we're talking about issues. Issues are grouped together in milestones, epics. We had to do that for last quarter. But let's actually take a look at what these things are, right? So I'm going to talk about what GitLab does in terms of all these things and why we're better than other people. So here's an issue. Actually, this is the issues tab. Let's go into here, right? So here's an issue, and this is a unit of work, right? So it could be create some new chart, create some new shopping cart function in my product, my website, update my website, something. It's a unit of work, right? As a developer, I get paid for solving issues. If I get solved 30 issues and everyone else is solving 10, I get a promotion, right? So that's fundamentally like what I do. Just like we get IQMs, they solve issues. So I'm going to talk about how we provide collaboration. When I was using GitHub, then this is the idea of silos, right? So with GitHub, generally speaking, only the developers use it. And because of that, after someone creates an issue, then people start collaborating on the best way to do it. So someone could say like, hey, I did this a year ago. I did it this way. It worked out pretty well for me. Boom. By him saying that, it saved me 50% of my time. What's the value of that to my organization? So the collaboration aspect for issues is very important. Other things is that like they could say like, hey, if someone could say like, don't do it this way, because if you do it this way, then it's gonna have this problem with our product. I found this out the hard way, like a month ago. I didn't know that, but now that he chimed that in, he saved me like 2 weeks of going down the wrong path, right? So collaboration is really important. So if you are using some sort of tool that only the developers are using, or only the test teams using, or all the security people are using, you're going to have the benefit of the collaboration of that team. The value of GitLab is that all of the teams use it, which means that your collaboration is better. I'll give you an example. So when I was a test engineer for about half a decade, and the big problem with, I wouldn't say a big problem, but like people changed things that would negatively impact our test stuff all the time. So someone would solve this issue in some way that would give me 2 additional weeks worth of work. Happened all the time. And a lot of times I couldn't see these changes coming in because like I didn't have visibility because we were using different tools. But if we had GitLab, then the person could say like, hey, I'm thinking about doing it this way. And then me as a test person could say, just letting you know, if you do it this way, then it's going to break our test infrastructure because our test infrastructure is not designed to go like, test things if you set up our API this way, right? And then a manager can say, hey, we don't have enough time to like push our roadmap out 2 weeks. Let's just go with another way, right? And then all of a sudden our organization has now saved 2 weeks of time because we have better cross-team collaboration. Cross-team collaboration is very, very key for engineering organization success. If an engineering organization has cross-team collaboration, they will be maybe like 40% better than someone who has like average cross-team collaboration. So yeah, we provide public collaboration. Another thing that's really important is just like how we saw all the changes come in for the code. And so it's that story of like, hey, I'm fixing this problem. The person who wrote this wrote it 2 years ago and he's no longer with the company, so I can't ask him about their code, right? But if I were to look at all of these issues in the collaboration here, I can find out the issue that corresponds with what that person was doing, and then I can read this person's reasoning, right? And then so now, as the person who's trying to fix this thing that was introduced 2 years later, I have more of an understanding on how to fix it. This is really, really, really important. Yeah, I'm trying to think about like a good analogy for this, but yeah. So all of this like history, someone can take a look, go in, all of this issues log, right? All these issues over here were in literally like, they were open 5 years ago, 6 years ago, right? And so someone can still go in and see what the developers were thinking when they made certain changes. And that's really, really, really important because a lot of times I got to go fix some change that was introduced 2 years ago. And so all of the history here is really, really important. All right, provide accountability and give management a track of progress. How we do this with issues is that we give people, we give metrics, right? And so the way to think about this is that engineers try to protect themselves a lot by sandbagging. And so the whole idea is if I'm a developer, I think that it's going to take me 2 weeks. My manager asks me how long it's going to take. I say 3 weeks. And the problem with that is that The manager then sandbags, right? So the director asks him, how long is all this stuff going to take? He thinks it can be 2 months. And then he says 3 months. And the big problem is your developer sandbag, your manager sandbags, your director sandbags, your senior director sandbags, your VP sandbag. Everyone sandbags 40%. Then all of a sudden your schedule is now inflated 150%. So what's the cash value loss of that to your organization? Well, it's large, right? And that's the problem with relying on word of mouth. If you have no metrics driven way of figuring out how much time's left in your project, you have to rely on word of mouth. And then all of a sudden your schedule inflates because everyone tries to sandbag. And the problem with that is that there's a universal rule in work that work expands to the amount of time that you give it, right? So if I give someone 2 months to do something, they're going to find some way to spend all that time. And a lot of times people aren't going to be honest and say they're bored, right? So how do we do this? One, we have burn down charts. This burn down chart shows from a metrics driven perspective, the velocity in which all of our issues are getting closed. So let's just say this big project has 683 issues, right? Director can come in and say, hey, at the rate that you're going, I think that you're going to be done in around August. So I'm going to give you 2 additional weeks. Does that sound good to you? So manager then says, you know, could push back, could explain some additional context. Hey, I have some people going on vacation, whatever. But they no longer have the ability to say, oh, I need 50% extra time and sandbag, right? They somewhat do, but it's a lot harder if there's metrics. So the burn down charts are really important. The other thing that's really important is built into the issues, we have time tracking. So it's like, I'm working on this issue. I spent my entire day on it. I'm going to submit 8 hours because that's a US work day into this issue. And then this issue is going to keep track of how much time I've spent into it. And so this is really important from a manager perspective, because like, if I find out, hey, there's this one issue, it's really, really important. If this slips, then we're going to be late for a project. We need to get progress on this. And if the developer is not spending any time on this because they want to go do other stuff, which happens all the time, then you now have an accountability mechanism where in your next one-on-one, you can say, hey, I looked in GitLab and I looked at this issue that's really important. I really communicated to you that this is really important. Have you spent any time on it? Because the issue doesn't say that you put any time into it, right? So now you have a metrics-driven way of finding out who's been working on what. The other thing that you can find out with time tracking is like, let's say developers put 100% of their time into it, and that usually means that they're stuck in some way. They don't know how to do it. And your manager can now come in and provide organizational leadership and say, hey, are you stuck on this? That's totally cool if you are. I'm understanding. I've been there before too, but you know, we have organizational challenges here. We do have a timeline. So what do you think if I paired you with, you know, developer Rachel with this one? And that's how you can provide assistance for developers who can't figure out how to implement something. So time tracking is really important. Due dates are also really important. It's just sort of like discrete ways of making things time specific. And SMART goals, your goals have to be time specific, right? All right, so optimally sequence work, that's roadmaps. Over here, you can see our GitLab roadmap. And so what's this actually show? This shows all of the individual projects that you have. So VP can look into here, see all of the projects that their managers are working on. This manager project starts, the project starts here, ends here. This project starts here, ends here, right? And now the problem is that like, if you're VP, you know that not all projects are created equally, right? So there's some projects that are extremely, extremely important. If this project's not done and it's not done well, and it's not done in the beginning, then there's all of these other projects that can't be done because they depend on the output of the first project, right? So in a situation like that, I got to put this project first. Another thing that's really important is like, let's just say that there's only 2 people in the organization that know Kubernetes, right? And so I know that they already said they're going to be on vacation in this month. Therefore, I got to go plan that they start this stuff here before they go on vacation or something like that, right? And so your roadmap can help you to sequence work in a way that makes the most sense for your organization. Your project managers, all they do is they log in the roadmap, see how stuff's going along, and see if like these like lines are like make the most sense. Another thing that's really important is, as you can see with our specific deadlines, like we got a lot of stuff that's running right now, right? And so now you got to think about like, all right, I only got a finite number of developer heads. Does it make sense that all of our projects are running in the beginning? Maybe we should spread things out more. Good engineering team is going to have their work front loaded so that you can build yourself cushion at the end, because usually stuff's late, right? But you can't put all of your work in the beginning, because otherwise your developers are going to be really stressed out, right? So it's got to be somewhat spread out across like, the next couple of months, and then your roadmaps are going to show you that. So it's as opposed to like everything being up front and then not very much stuff in the back, then like spread things out more, be more sensitive to your teams, right? Your roadmaps tell you that. So it teaches you how to optimally sequence work. The difference between doing this and not doing it is basically, if you don't do this well, your organization is not going to run. Project manager, all they do is come in, look at the roadmaps, see how stuff's coming along, see if things are being done in the right order. And that's basically just completely necessary for engineering teams to do their jobs. So we talked about the developer workflow. Great. We got to talk about Kanban charts. Do any of y'all use Kanban for your own stuff?
Yeah, I use Trello.
Okay, cool. Do you want to show us your Trello chart real quick? It's private, don't worry about it.
I did use Trello. I haven't used it in 2 or 3 months, so I don't know. I'll see if I can dig it out. Let me see.
Okay.
So
yeah, I use Trello for Kanban too. Yeah, so you know what? I don't want you to dive into your personal life. I'll just show you the one that I have set up. But what's a Kanban chart? Kanban chart is the idea that it's just one way of doing project management. There's other ways in which you can do it. But the whole idea is, think about like a conveyor belt. So Kanban actually comes from Japan, and it was actually how they did stuff in factories. And the whole idea is there's this big conveyor belt. In the first section, they do something. Second section, they build off of what was done in the first section, make it better. And then at the end of the conveyor belt, now you have like a car, or you have like a kayak or whatever sort of thing. So what they do for the Kanban chart is you have a bunch of different columns, right? And then so for our wedding analogy, let's just say that we're using Trello for Kanban charts. So like we figure out all the work that's involved, we create issues for all this work. Now we have 300 different issues. And if we were to set this up with a Kanban chart, how it works is that there's different columns, right? And so the columns correspond to the different stages in your conveyor belt. The first stage is nothing started yet. Second stage is like we're planning. Third stage is that we're actively building a thing. Fourth stage is that we think it's done, it needs checking. And then fifth stage is we're very confident that it's done. And so like if we were to implement our wedding project with a Kanban chart, then how it would be like is like, all right, I'm responsible for picking out the flowers. I go talk to the bride and groom, see, I've looked up I researched these vendors, I found out their budget, I found out what they wanted, I think that these are good fits. In progress, I'm now talking to the vendor, I'm trying to negotiate rate. And then, needs check. So I finally get final approval from, the bride and groom, and then done is like when we have a contract that's already signed and we know what to expect. And then I've communicated that to all stakeholder parties. And so the idea is that in the beginning of a project, all of your issues start out on the left, and then they moved to the right in the done column. When everything's in a done column, then we're done with our project. And that's how Kanban works. Trello, you can do Kanban too. Trello is owned by Atlassian now. They bought them. But the whole idea is that if you go to an issue board, you can create the same thing, right? So open issues is like all of the stuff that this isn't actually like a Kanban chart, but if you want to set this up, open issues is not started, planning, implementing, needs approval, and then like done. So that's how you could do it with Trello. Can I stop to clarify anything real quick? I know I've been jumping around all over the place.
I have just a question about the issue boards. Is there still a debate about if we could create our own issue boards for our personal needs, as just scheduling what we want to do? Because we tried this, I think, when I started in October, and then it was said we cannot do this because of reason A and reason B. That's why I think many of us don't use issue boards in GitLab. We use maybe Trello, or we use something else that we have just for us on the side, because it's just not possible at the moment for us to have individual boards in GitLab to use.
Yeah, you can, if you're gonna try to create like an issue board under like the GitLab project, then there's gonna be like rules that are associated with that. But if you want to create your own like project and then create its own issue board, you can do that. So over here, I have like this sandbox environment for, and then I've had like SDRs in our organization like add stuff to it so that they can work with GitLab. And you can create like your own issue boards over here, right? So it's like I have all these fake issues that don't actually mean anything, but you can do that with your own public project now. I didn't need to ask anyone to do this.
Cool, thanks.
For sure. Thanks for asking. All right, so milestone and roadmaps, that sounds good. Competitors, got to talk about competitors. So first chart that I showed, best 40 project management tools. Don't want to be one of 40. What you want to be is unique and the only person that can do what people want in your space, right? So main competitors, Jira, they have over 50% of the market share. I've used Jira before. Let me tell you stories about Jira and my thoughts about it. Jira is very heavy. So what that means is that it takes a lot of time to install it. Updating it takes a long time. It is good at what it does, but it's a very, very, very heavy solution. So like, it's not like, I'll just give you like a meal analogy, right? So there's some restaurants, you come in, you pay your money, you have your food in 2 minutes, and then you can eat, and then you're out in like 30 minutes. Jira is like, you come, you wait for a table, for 20 minutes, you finally get a waiter, you get your table, it's like fine dining, right? So it's like your appetizers come, then your wine comes, then your entrees come, and then it's just like, it's a 2-hour event. So it's like, but Jira is good. It's just that it takes a really long time, and companies have to pay money to have Jira administrators because it's so complicated. So a little bit about history. We try to compete with Jira first. You know, the whole idea of like, hey, we can replace your entire tool chain. And then people realize like, oh wait, people don't want to like get off of their Jira. Why is that? Well, the problem is that like we saw the value of having all of this log of issues in your organization, right? So if I'm trying to fix something that happened 2 years ago, I can go look at the issue. I can go see what the developers were thinking and the collaboration that happened. This ultimately saves me time in an organization, makes an organization more efficient. So it's something that's very powerful for an organization. The problem is that if I've been using Jira for the last 4 years, all of my data and history is on Jira. So it's really difficult to convince me to go migrate from Jira to all of a sudden GitLab to do project management, considering the fact that they have over 50% of the market share, all of these C-levels, they're talking to their colleagues, all their other companies are using Jira. So it's like, it's hard, right? I've used Jira before. I've also used GitHub before. I've also used GitLab before. I think that our stuff is the best. I'm gonna, not skirt around that because I think that Jira is too heavy, and I think that developers, they appreciate something that is quicker and more intuitive to use. I think that Jira is really complicated. But that being said, they are the incumbent. And when your business and all of these C-levels friends that are presidents of other companies, they use Jira, it's a hard sell to get them to migrate from one project management tool to another, especially considering they have 5 years of data on Jira, right? So that's just a hard thing to migrate off of. So we move from a replace motion to an integration motion where GitLab can work great with Jira. It has first-class integrations. If you want silver, you get this. If you want, premium, then you get this, so on and so forth. So yeah. All right, just bringing everything home. I know that we talked about a lot of stuff, and I just want to go back to this slide real quick. So just imagine like this vendor over here, right? So all of these different project management tools. Over here, you have lists of 40 best project management tools, and we do have good differentiators in them. I personally, if I were a C-level, I were looking at a project management tool, I would highly consider GitLab for it. But the ultimate reason why I would buy GitLab is not because it has X, Y, and Z feature over our competitors. The reason why I would buy GitLab is because it's one tool for the entire software development process, which saves me time, money, integration, maintenance, license costs, and it's seamless. So integrated SCM, CI, security, all of this other stuff, and the value that that brings my organization. So that's what I try to talk about a lot. And so yeah, GitLab is one shared table. That's our unique differentiator, as opposed to when I was a developer, our DevOps people use Jenkins, our developers use GitHub, our test people use something else. And when you have everyone in the same platform, you have one shared table, which means that you have better cross-organizational collaboration, which makes us more efficient in the long run. So yeah, great. Can I help clean it? Can I help clarify anything? Or if not, then let's just talk about homework, and I'll give you 10 minutes of your time back.
I just have one question about the Jira integration, because you mentioned this data that you might have for 5 years, and it's very hard to convince people to change this. If you integrate Jira within GitLab and it works now simultaneously with your new issues and everything, how long is would it take to migrate everything that the old data to GitLab on average, depending on your volume and everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's different approaches that you can take. One approach that you can take is, here's GitLab. You want to use GitLab for SCM and CI and all this other stuff, and you want to keep your Jira. Well, one thing that you can do is, as opposed to creating GitLab issues, what you can do is get GitLab to talk to Jira, and you're still creating all of these tickets in Jira, but GitLab is now going to reflect all of your Jira issues. So still log your stuff in Jira, but now you can see everything in GitLab. So you don't have to like have one tab open for GitLab, another tab open for like another tool, so on and so forth. So like that helps me to do things faster, right? Another solution is like, hey, I have Jira. I want to go pull all of this Jira stuff into GitLab. The data is now living in GitLab. All of that history that we talked about is in GitLab, and I'm going to turn my Jira off because now the data lives in two different places. It lives in Jira and GitLab, right? So if I take that approach, then I only need one tool. I don't know how long that migration process takes. As homework, I'm going to go look up the answer to that, and I'll get back to you on that. But thanks for asking a good question.
Thanks.
All right, great. Okay, so I think that everyone here has had a class so far. We know how this goes. I have like a quick homework for y'all. It's, please only spend 20 to 30 minutes on it. But it basically just has to do with like, you know, the stuff that we talked about today. So what do y'all think about getting this in by this Friday?
I will still have to send in the stuff from last week because I was on vacation, but I got sick. But I will try to do it by the end of the week and send both in, and then we're done.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks. In general, my philosophy with it is, hey, if you're on PTO, like, I totally understand that. Doesn't matter. It's just that I found that if people don't do it, then they forget about it. So need some sort of date in mind. It's time-specific goal, right? Okay, cool. Well, yeah, thanks for attending this session today. And if I can help out in any way, let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right, take care, y'all.
Bye.